members of the national government, members of the Budget Commission of the Honorable Congress of the Nation, deputies, senators and leaders, both of Avance's freedom and of the rest of the political arc that accompanies me today, and all the Argentines who are watching from their homes, good evening. Today we are here to present a national budget project that will forever change the history of our country, so that we can once again be the great Argentina that we once were. After years where the political class lived by putting an end to individual freedoms, today we come here to put an end to the state. This budget project that we are presenting today has a methodology that covers the fiscal balance regardless of what the economic scenario is. This means that regardless of what happens to the economy at the macro level, the fiscal result of the national public sector will be balanced. This fiscal shielding opens a new page in our history until now unknown. From now on, Argentina will be solvent, with the consequent and low risk to the country, the interest rate, and consequently the increase in investment, productivity, real wages, and ultimately the fall of poverty and indigence. In fact, I cannot stop commenting that we are here today in this same house, way in December of the year 2000, when it was declared and applauded during the presidency of Adolfo Rodriguez Sol. A house full of people, and in the middle of enormous Agrabah, the default of Argentina. That default, which was celebrated and applauded by the entire ruling class, would be the beginning of a populist cycle that has destroyed Argentina. Some will wonder why I am here tonight, if in general the one who usually presents the national budget in the executive part of Congress is the Minister of Economy. I decided to do it personally for two reasons. First, because I'm an economist, and I am proud of that. I am the first economist president in Argentine history, to be more precise. And since I am an economist, probably due to professional deformation, for me the destiny of a people is plagued by the economic definitions it takes. Because only on the basis of a healthy economy can people truly exercise their freedom. Well, the first and foremost of these definitions is about what is the value of the economy, and how the money of taxpayers is spent. That neither more nor less is the national budget. Let us remember that, in some sense, modern democracy, as we know it today, demands a revolution that was conducted under the principle that there cannot be tax without representation. The main task of this honorable House, for what was thought, is to establish a national budget to define what the state does with the money of taxpayers. The second reason why I am presenting myself here today is because I come to propose a diametrically different budget project than what we are used to. Not only different, but the most radically different in our history. And I have learned firsthand that the more profound the change, the harder effort to fight for it. That is why we are here today, because the national budget is not just another law. It is the law of laws. It is the roadmap under which we will order the priorities of our management in the present national hour. The foundation stone of this budget is the first truth of a healthy public administration, a truth that has been ignored for many years. The first thing to understand is that when governments want to spend, and spend compulsively, and do not give them the margin to continue raising taxes, as happens in Argentina, the only way to pay the bill is by borrowing money, or printing it by the central bank. Let us briefly remember what has been the historical methodology of our ruling class. As we have seen in the past, as politicians do not understand the budgetary restriction and do not want to stop spending, they generate a deficit. To cover that deficit, the first thing they do is take on debt. But as they do not make the necessary adjustments, the debt becomes unpaid, and then they default. This is how we become the biggest serial default in the world. But the default is not innocuous. Falling into default is what causes the deficit. So the dollars start to be scarce, and politicians have no better idea than to set up export controls to get the dollars from the private sector. And on the other hand, they establish capital controls to try to retain the scarce dollars that the country generates. As this causes Argentina to remain with decreasing capital, we have to make sure that we do not lose our capital. And this causes Argentina to remain without credit in the financial markets, with no better idea than to print money, which, as we already know, generates inflation, because inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Those who do not like it, like it. To combat inflation, they set up price controls, which 4,000 years history sure do not work. And they invent regulations that destroy private property, hinder economic information, destroy capital, and consequently increase poverty and indigency. This is the sad Argentine history of what politicians and analysts call economic policy, which did nothing else in Argentina than the systematic violation of the rights and properties of citizens. In other words, the deficit is only covered with debt, which is neither more nor less future taxes. Taxes on future generations, or with more current taxes, or with the printing of money. In Argentina, there can be no more taxes. It is the country with the highest amount of taxes in the world. And if we add to that 50% of economic activity is informal, the formal positive pressure in Argentina is around 60%. A real trigger for a country that desperately needs to accumulate capital. Once the possibility of raising taxes is discarded, the other way to solve the deficit is with debt. In other words, by saddling future generations with today's waste. This is nothing else than to deliver on the altar of populism the life of our young people. In other words, it implies the extermination of future generations, who today are already in 70% are poor. But Argentina, being the biggest serial defaulter in the world, does not have access to credit for now, which prevents any kind of debt, even if it were desirable, when in reality it never is. And when that alternative is exhausted, the deficit is paid by printing pesos, which is to steal from all Argentines through the smuggling, so that they take the size of a scam we have experienced. Politics has stolen from Argentines about $25 billion a year in smuggling in the last 20 years. And they say stolen, not as euphemism, but in the literal sense, because the more money is emitted, each peso that an Argentine has in his pocket is worth less, with the painful aggregate that inflation, which is a direct consequence of monetary emission, hits between 25 and 30 times more those who have less. The problem of the deficit, however, is not a novelty. In Argentina, we had a fiscal deficit 113 of the last 123 years, and those 10 years that we did not have a deficit was because everything had already been spent, and we were in default. It means that practically 100% of our modern history, governments have inherited this basic truth of the economy and have passed the common injuries of Argentines over and over again. It also means that this will be the first fiscal year without entering the default of all Argentine history, while if there is no management, it is no coincidence, then, that we are the maximum defaulting serial in modern history. If we have lived a century taking debt that we cannot pay, it is no coincidence that we have lived with exorbitant inflation during the last century, having finished the year 2022-23 with the highest annual inflation in the world, above Venezuela and Lebanon. It is no coincidence either that in the last 120 years, we have gone from having the highest per capita GDP in the world to being a country where 60% of the population is poor. That is the snake of all Argentine economic problems. The tax deficit is the only constant throughout our history, because debt is the product of the deficit. Monetary emission is the product of the deficit. Inflation is the product of financing the deficit with emission. The destruction of capital is the product of the debt generated by the deficit. Therefore, poverty and indignity are the products of the deficit. You may ask, Then who can this model serve? Well, do you know what the mother of the deficit is? The reason for which there is a deficit, the endless compulsion of politicians for public spending, who do not know any budget restriction, because it is only by spending money that it is not theirs, that they can do business for themselves, their clients and their friends. Milton Friedman said that there is no worse way to spend than state spending. Because there are 4 ways to spend money. Spend your own money on yourself. Spend your own money on others. Spend other people's money on oneself. Or spend other people's money on others. And since one does not know other people's preferences, nor is he responsible for other people's money, because he does not know how much it costs to get it. The worst way to spend money is to spend the money of others on others, which is precisely what state spending is. Today, something that has to be clear once and for all. There is nothing but nothing more unprofitable for the common of Argentinians than the fiscal deficit. And there is nothing but nothing that enriches politicians than the fiscal deficit. This is a sad role that public spending plays in the caste system. Politics has decorated this model with good intentions and resounding theoretical frameworks. For years we have heard them talk about social justice, which is not only unfair but extremely violent. Because social justice involves taking from some to give others, based on an inconsistent principle that says that where there is a need, there's a right. Well, the problem is that needs are infinite, and the resources are finite. That is why, when the politician asks for more and more spending, they distribute money that there is not. In reality, what he is doing is swindling the entire Argentinian people. He is playing with the future of all to gain a couple of political points, with some well-thinking speech on the way. Because the politician knows perfectly well that when he increases public spending, he is putting the money in one pocket for the people, to get double for the other pocket. That is why we veto the project to increase public spending, that this Congress sanctioned, and that is why we will veto all the projects that serve against tax equilibrium. And we do this because we are not going to make conflicts and scam the Argentinian people to adopt a populist measure. The only context in which we will accept to discuss the increase in public spending is when the request comes with an explicit explanation of which party must be reduced to cover it. If it is not like that, it will be vetoed. This, which should be a truth of progresso, seems like a sacrilege said in this House, instead of where the totality of populist measures that have ruined this country have come from. The paradox is that they always come out with enormous support, because it is a tacit role of Argentinian politics that the more votes a project is in the Congress, the worse it is for society. This is how they have demonstrated it in this House in recent weeks, because they have something very clear, which weighs more than any loss that society can endure. They know that if the deficit is determined, many people will lose their lives. Unfortunately, this compulsion for the spending that politicians have has been constant for the last Argentine century. Since 1901 until today, there have been 22 crises, and the population of the country has grown exponentially. With the arrival of the economic crisis, the population of the country has grown substantially. The problem of the population is that the population of the country paying taxes has become increasingly small. Since 1901 until today, there have been 22 economic crises in Argentina. 20 of these 22 are characterized by a high or extravagant fiscal deficits, which generated a great volatility in the Argentine economy, attacking investment and growth. Having said this, let us stop remember how the fiscal framework was prior to the crises that we remember with great anguish. Prior to the Rojo Goza, the fiscal deficit was 14 points of the GDP. Approaching the crisis of 1981-82 with a changeable table, it was 11 points. Before the hyperinflation of 1989 was unleashed, the national state carried with 8 deficit points. And behind one of our last national traumas, the crisis of the convertibility of 2001 and 2002, we had a deficit of 7 points of the GDP. In this journey, we see a clear pattern. In addition to the persistence of politicians for spending the money we did not have, each time the country has a lower resistance to the fiscal distortion. Each time the crisis bursts with less deficit. And you will wonder why this happens. It happens because having abused all the mechanism of definition of the deficit that exists, both the Argentinians and the markets give us less and less credit. This means that when we approach the heritage situation, we are not only talking about the mass of 2023, but about the accumulated effect of an entire century of recurrent crises. It also means that if we do not solve it now, if we do not fight once and for all, the solution will be more and more difficult. And soon it will become an almost impossible task. World politics, in economy and in life itself. One does not choose with what card to play. One plays with those dealt. The fools ignore reality, the stubborn deny it. They who bet on success accept it and solve it. The handout as was neither more nor less than the worst inheritance in history, both in tax and monetary matters, and in multiple dimensions of Argentinian social life. We inherited a consolidated deficit of 15 points of the GDP, of which 5 points belong to the Argentinian government, and 5 points belong to the Argentinian government, and 5 points belong to the Argentinian government, of which 5 points belong to the treasury and 10 to the central bank. More than any of these crises that I have just mentioned, that some who say they are economists, who live from forgetting things on purpose, appear every day on television, making the account that we lived in Switzerland, to put it in powerful numbers, adjusting the deficit of 15 points of the GDP, implicated that we make a cut in the expenditure of around $90 billion, which is nothing more than saying that we are returning that money to the Argentinians. In other words, we do not exaggerate when we say that we have made the greatest adjustment in the history of humanity. That is why it does not stop me from calling attention to the leaders of all colors and flags that accuse us so often of not having management. That is why I tell you. That is why I tell you, you know what? Managing is not assigning thousands of officials in all corners of the state, when half of those areas should not exist. Managing is not a national director, firm on a resolution to spend millions of pieces on services that the private sector can provide better and cheaper. Managing is not making rats that do not lead anywhere, or houses that no one wants. Managing is not knowing how to use the GDP. As the former candidate Massa said, managing is having avoided the hyperinflation that they left us at the door. Managing is healing the balance of the central bank and deactivating the debt bomb that we inherited. Managing is reducing public spending in the way we did, in the record time we did, and without having abandoned the most vulnerable sectors of society. Managing is having approved the largest legislative reform in the last 40 years, and without having abandoned the most vulnerable sectors of society. Managing is having approved the largest legislative reform in the last 40 years, with 37 deputies and 6 senators, which is why I thank those who have accompanied us in all these actions. Managing is throwing away the 31,000 nakai that we have thrown away in the first 9 months. Managing is approving Managing is approving the only paper ballot, a flag of those who speak of transparency, but who have done little for it. Managing is eliminating the intermediaries who made a profit from poverty. Managing is eliminating the intermediaries who made a profit from poverty. Managing is having eliminated the pickets and spending more than 4 months without street cuts in El Amba. Managing is also having reduced the 75% of homicides in Rosario. Managing is also having reduced the 75% of homicides in Rosario. Managing is removing the infinite regulations that exist in all sectors of the economy to make life easier for those who undertake work. Managing is recovering the trusts at the private sector and projecting to invest more than $50 billion, as it has already done in the past. To invest more than $50 billion, as it has already done in the past. In short, managing is not managing the state. Managing is shrinking the state to enlarge society. We are solving in 1 year the disaster that our predecessors, for inaction or omission, generated for more than 120 years. So one is responsible for failure. That tease us of not having management. We carry it with pride. What we are doing. However, the giant challenge persists. And now we have to make the titanic effort, realized by all Argentines, and give sustainability for the future, and give sustainability to the future. That is why we have decided that part of our legacy is to always change the methodology through which the budget is made. The deficit has always been a consequence of thinking first how much to spend, and then see how to finance it. We are going to do it the other way around, thinking first how much we have to say, and then see how much we can spend. That is why we are proposing an unbreakable fiscal rule for this budget and for all budgets. From now on, I invite you to come back for a minute to clear the axe with me, to understand what it is about. You can get up, because you are not in difficulty. Long live the people. 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 Look, whether I read or not, I can continue to add with difficulty, Martinez. You can take notes because now I'm starting. Let's go. The first premise of which we start is that the primary surplus has to equivalently or obligatorily exceed the amount of the interests of the public.
La primera premisa de la que partimos es que el superávit primario tiene que equivaler o exceder obligatoriamente al monto de los intereses de deuda a pagar.
The amount of the interest on debt to pay, so that if the primary superávit is the result of netting the income with the current expenses and capital, the primary expense will have to be equal or less than the income, less the primary super of it. That is to say, the level of expenditure to ARROGANCE will be conditioned by the level of primary super of it to achieve it, which in turn will be conditioned by the observed income net of the amount of interest to pay for the debt. Having said this, now let's stop for a second on the expense. The current expense is composed of the sum of the automatic expense, illicitly indexed by law, and the discretionary expense. The automatic expense is the component of the expense that is indexed to inflation and other macro variables. The discretionary expense is not indexed. That is, no matter how much inflation there is, it is still the same. Under this new scheme that we are proposing, if the income is greater than estimated, the automatic expense could increase in line with the income, but the discretionary expense will remain frozen. On the other hand, looking now at the income when the increase in the collection is transitory, the state will be able to save by absorbing pesos or to cancel debt, which will allow to continue lowering inflation and or improve the profile of Argentine debt. And if economic growth is permanent and consequently the increase in income is structural, the state will be able to return to society that greater collection in tax reduction as we have committed. On the other hand, if the economy does not grow and the income is less than estimated, the automatic expense will also fall and we will reduce the discretionary expense so that the deficit zero is reached. Therefore, this time it will be the public sector and not the private sector that will absorb the effects of the disturbances that the economy suffers. In summary, our budgetary methodology will achieve three unprecedented objectives. One, it will protect the fiscal balance forever, ending with the punishment of debt and emission. It will force the state to take charge and absorb the effects of disturbances in the economy. And when there are permanent improvements, as there will be in the coming years, it will force to return the excess collection to society through tax reduction. This means that, in order to maintain this methodology from now on, we will not only be able to reduce taxes, but also the size of the state, which is the true imposition pressure. I want to repeat it again so that it is clear and there is no doubt that this methodology that we are presenting in the national budget protects the fiscal result, whatever the macroeconomic scenario. It does not matter what happens to the economy. It does not matter if our estimates are good or bad. Whatever the economic scenario, the fiscal result will always be guaranteed. But for this to be possible, in Argentina we must have an honest debate about what is to be occupied and what is not the national state. We have become accustomed to thinking of the national state as a nanny who has to be in charge of everything from feeding it to entertaining every citizen. But when a state takes on tasks that do not compete with it, it ends up fulfilling the fundamental responsibilities that do correspond to it. This is how we come to a state that, in order to fulfill all the supposed wishes of its citizens, cannot fulfill by no means its basic obligations. This is how we reach 50% poverty, the return of illiteracy, rates of federal criminality, an energy framework that does not withstand 4 days of heat in a row, abandoned armed forces and without the capacity to respond, a tragically slow justice and public hospitals without supplies that cannot cure anyone. Meanwhile, thousands of millions of pesos were dilapidated in receipts to which 300 people went. Public media at the service of the militants, routes that did not lead anywhere. and spent the day promulgating laws that oscillated between useless and harmful ridicules. As Aisha said, the closer the collapse of an empire, the stupider its laws are. And many Saishiro have done stupid things.
Más se acerca el colapso de un imperio, más estúpidas son sus leyes. Y vaya que ha hecho cosas estúpidas el kirchnerismo.
And the worst of all, it left us a system in which 70% of public spending is spent on social spending of a different kind.
70% del gasto público se va en gasto social de distinto tipo. Esto que durante años ha sido aclamado como un éxito.
This, which has been acclaimed as a success for years for the entire political arc, indicates nothing more than a humanitarian tragedy, because it means that more than 20 million Argentines cannot be sustained by their own means. If it is not with the help of the state, help that is funded by stealing a part of society with taxes. If anyone believes that this is something desirable, let me tell you that they are wrong. Do you think this is alien to the state to perform its essential task so poorly? That is why it is time to return to the basics and give some definitions again. The fundamental thing that a national state has to do is ensure macroeconomic stability, external relations, and the administration of the law. Period. Any other issue can be resolved through the market, or it is a competition of the subnational governments. To be clear, I disclose it in parts. What is macroeconomic stability? That there is no tax deficit and that there is monetary stability, and that consequently there is no inflation and economic growth is facilitated. It is facilitated because the private sector decides what to invest. Not let a bureaucrat does it from a chair and in the middle he stays with something in the way. It is more, and that since there is no inflation, there is no price distortion, and that consequently people, families and companies can recover economic calculation, the ability to project and ultimately recover their future. What is the administration of the law? Security to protect citizens from possible attacks from others on their lives and property. Justice to impartially address conflicts between citizens and punish those who violate the law. And defense to protect us from possible conflicts with other countries or external threats. I repeat, any other issue can be resolved through the market, or it is a function of the subnational governments. It must be understood at once that the state should not interfere in the economic process. We do not believe in the counter-cyclical economic policy of any kind. We believe in freedom, in the rights of property, and that prices are expressed freely. If the economic cycle is genuine, this is, if it is of real origin. The state has nothing to do but guarantee macroeconomic stability and the adherence to the law. If the economic cycle is not of real origin, but is generated by the state, it is the same as accepting that a mobster breaks our legs and then comes to offer us the tickets. We do not want the state's tickets. We want to live in freedom. We do not want them to break our legs. Just as the deficit is the heart of the problem, the reduction in spending to achieve a surplus will be at the center of the solution. Why? Because it is the only way to return to the Argentines the fruit of their work, that today the state steals from them with taxes. The deficit will make the debt sustainable. The sustainability of the debt will lower the country's risk and lower the financial cost, contributing to the increase in investment and savings, and consequently to the rise in the real wages, which is the only way to low poverty and indignity. In turn, it will imply less future fiscal pressure on taxpayers and taxes, which will mean greater incentive to invest in a globalized economy, and even more since the existence of the internet. Capital has become a nomad. Today, anyone can open an account in the United States or Paraguay without moving from their home. And they do it looking for better fiscal conditions than the ones we offer. That is why it is imperative that Argentina becomes attractive again for the Argentines. We have to end this drive to expel the capital from our compatriots with prohibitive taxes, which the only thing they do is reduce the flow and size of our economy, punishing the country as a whole with more poverty and more exclusion. We want Argentine companies to be competitive again so that they can hire more workers, pay them better salaries, and thus stop the human capital exodus that we have lived for more than 20 years. We must be friendly once and for all with the idea that the best thing for a worker is an entrepreneur who invests. But the only way to multiply the number of companies is by letting them put their hands in their pockets and releasing them from the hell of regulations, permits, and very high costs that private activity has in Argentina. To reach this point, we have proposed the most ambitious structural reform plan in all of Argentina's history, which began with Decree 6023, continuing with the approval of the basis law sanctioned by this Congress, and continues with all the deregulations that we announced in the previous Congress, adding the law projects that we will continue to send to this Congress. Thanks to this mega reform of the state that we have undertaken, we will be achieving levels of economic freedom similar to those of Germany, France, or Italy, in less than a year of management, with wind and tide against us. And we are going in a fun direction, and we have decided to make the country the freest in the world, because freedom will bring us prosperity and we will be able to live in peace. However, even if everything goes as we think, this war that we carry out against public spending and the Argentine cost is fought in all the dimensions of the state and also in the provincial and municipal jurisdictions. That is why I tell the governors to fulfill the commitment to lower the consolidated public spending to 25 points of the GDP. Requires that the provinces as a whole make an additional adjustment of $60 billion. We have already fulfilled our part of the agreement, now you are missing. The Argentines throughout the country know perfectly well that for every peso they stop spending, the provinces and municipalities will be able to return it in gross income or other taxes. If they comply with this popular mandate, the Argentines will be grateful. But let me say that there is something that I am sure that the Argentines will not allow. And that is that when the national state eliminates or lowers taxes and you want to raise yours, it will not work. The Argentines are rebellious people and tired of the slander of politicians. We are living in a moment of fire in our country. Do not underestimate it. In fact, when I entered politics, I pointed out that I did not come to herd sheep, but to wake up lions. I repeat, this way I do not complicate the end. When I entered politics, I pointed out that I did not come to herd sheep, but to wake up lions. I repeat, this way I did not complicate the end. When I entered politics, I pointed out that I did not come to herd sheep, but to wake up lions. And I tell you that if you have not seen it or do not want to see it, the lions have woken up. I repeat, this way I do not complicate the end. When I entered politics, I pointed out that I did not come to herd sheep, but to wake up lions. And I tell you that if you have not seen it or do not want to see it, the lions have woken up. I repeat, this way I do not complicate the end. When I entered politics, I pointed out that I did not come to herd sheep, but to wake up lions. And I tell you that if you have not seen it or do not want to see it, the lions have woken up. I repeat, this way I did not come to herd sheep, but to wake up lions. I repeat, this way I did not come to herd sheep, but to wake up lions. I tell you that I came to wake up lions, but I did not come to herd sheep. In the history of our country, there are no consecutive moments where we can change the course of history. If it were easy, we wouldn't be where we are today. That's why we have the opportunity, more than opportunity, the obligation, to take advantage of this moment. Because remember, the more we immerse ourselves in the bottom of the sea, the more reason to go out to sea. For the only way to progress is to end the tax deficit, low public spending, eliminate taxes, and just in the exercise of freedom, by the Argentinians, all that you hate.
Si hacemos las cosas bien, vamos a vivir en un país con
If we do things right, if we live in a country with the economic stability, or planning a life project, forming a family, or starting a profitable business, will become a reality again. If we do things right, we will lead the rankings of economic freedom in the world. If we do things right, we will have a country where the state will become a servant of its citizens, and not its master and father. As Milton Friedman said, if we do things right,
Por eso, honorables miembros del Congreso de la Nación, la presente hora política nacional les ofrece dos opciones. Una es hacer exactamente lo contrario a lo que venimos haciendo hace más de 100 años, para despegar y volver a hacer a la Argentina grande nuevamente. Otra es seguir haciendo lo mismo de siempre, dejando todo como está y mantener este sistema putrefacto que empobrece a todos los argentinos día a día. Esos son los dos caminos.
those are the two paths. Members of this honorable Congress know that a decision on which side of the story wants to be is theirs. Then the citizens will place them in Agola Avenue or in the corner of the veiled rats who bet on the state and against their people. To conclude, I want to quote again Marco Tulio Cicerón, the great Roman legislator.
A Marco Tulio Cicerón, el gran legislador romano que decía, el presupuesto debe equilibrar.
He said, the budget must be balanced, the treasury must be reapproved, the public debt must be reduced, the arrogance of public officials must be moderated and controlled, and the help to other countries must be eliminated so that Rome does not go bankrupt. People must then to work again instead of living at the expense of the state. This phrase has more than 2,000 years, and you did not learn anything. I trust that this Honorable National Congress will debate the national budget project with
Confío en que este honorable Congreso Nacional debatirá el proyecto de presupuesto nacional con la responsabilidad y la seriedad que nuestra situación
the responsibility and seriousness that our current situation requires. May God bless the Argentinians and may the force of heaven be with us. Long live freedom, damn it. Long live freedom, carajo. Long live freedom, carajo. Long live freedom, damn it. Thank you very much.